informational warfare is basically terrorism, is basically like military aggression. Because it's the same, it results in actual human victims, it results in losses, it results in crisis, in destabilization, and it's a combat tool, and it's one of the most powerful combat tools used by Russian terrorists nowadays.
Hello. Our guest this week goes by the nom de guerre of Operator Starsky, and he was a frontline fighter with the Ukrainian Armed Forces at the beginning of the war, notably at the Battle of the Airport at Hostomel. I visited that spot, and we were able to discuss it. I'll put a link to that vlog below. Currently, however, Starsky is involved in an equally important battle, that online, the information war, just as consequential to the future of Ukraine and the globe in general, because there is a body count and it will influence the future of not only the war here in Ukraine, but also the survival of liberal democracies everywhere, something that Moscow knows very well and is putting a lot of effort in attacking. That gives us an opportunity to discuss in great length how to recognize and combat this information war. So, Starsky, thank you for joining us so much. We have already spoken about the Battle of Hostomel. I have a vlog up on my personal channel where I visited you and we talked about that. So you were involved in one of the most important battles of the initial stages of this full-scale invasion. And anybody who wants to learn about that should go check that vlog out. But you've transitioned since then from being a frontline soldier to fighting on the information battlefield. You are particularly involved in combating Russian disinformation campaigns. Tell me a little bit about what that battlefield looks like, both in terms of what the Russians are doing and what you as a Ukrainian disinformation soldier or combating disinformation is doing on both sides of the equation. So what are the Russians up to and how are you fighting them?
First of all, Phil, thank you so much for inviting me. Always a pleasure seeing you. And you asked a really, really interesting and important question. How does it look like? Because a lot of people in the States, for example, they know that Russians create bot farms, that they spread disinformation deliberately in the American society and around Europe. We all hear every single day about Russian bots, Russian bot farms being closed. Last week there was this big Russian bot farm that was shut down by a joint effort of the US and Netherlands. We often hear about those things, and people think that like it always was like that, but they never ask themselves a fundamental question: why do Russians spread disinformation? Why do they wage the propaganda? Why do they wage informational warfare in the Western society, in the Western environment? And the answer is they use information as a combat tool. Basically, for Russians, propaganda and fakes part of very sophisticated informational operation. And it was like that since Soviet times, when Russia and the US and the West generally were adversaries were basically military enemies, right? And it's like that today. Even despite all the previous opinions that Russia may become like democratic and friendly, we all realized it was a nonsense. So why do they do that? I really hope that one day we will evolve to this point of understanding that informational warfare is basically terrorism, is basically like military aggression. Because it's the same, it results in actual human victims, it results in losses, it results in crisis, in destabilization, and it's a combat tool, and it's one of the most powerful combat tools used by Russian terrorists nowadays. So basically, this is how it looks like today. They create informational campaign. They assess public opinion. They have focus groups in most of the countries of the world that function through different Russian offices, including their embassies, including their strategic communication agencies, including their intelligence, of course, FSB, the External Intelligence Service, and also through Russian culture representative offices, so-called Россотрудничество, the Russian collaboration that they have in more than 100 countries nowadays. They research public opinion, then they implement a virus, and they wait until this virus starts working. Previously, it would take them months, years. Nowadays, due to the available technologies, unfortunately, it takes much less time. That recent bot farm that was shut down in the United States, it was operated automatically through Russian software, and it used AI-powered bots that generated content on behalf of American citizens. So people who want to know more about Russian misinformation, and when they ask themselves whether Russia is a threat to a democratic world, they should ask a different question. Why do they do that? Why do they create bots? Why do they create fake accounts? Why do they train generative models to spread disinformation on behalf of Americans, sharing Russian narratives, sharing things like, I don't want my taxes to be sent to Ukraine. Ukraine must give up. We have much more problems in the United States. We are, I don't know, Ukrainians are dying, but like, who cares about Ukrainians? We have like Mexican immigrants. We will, oh my God, we should act. So why do Russians do that? Why do they spread misinformation among the American society? That is a fundamental question everybody should ask themselves.
Yeah, and you know, it's far easier for them to fight an information war than an actual war with NATO and in particular America. So, you know, they get a lot more bang for their buck as it is. How disturbed are you to see, in particular, it's disproportionate. The Republican Party in the United States seems to be very susceptible to this kind of Russian disinformation, and they regurgitate. You see leaders within the Republican Party during this campaign cycle, especially, literally saying word for word the Kremlin or the FSB or the GRU script. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, all these like prominent Republicans, they seem to be very susceptible to this. How concerned are you that the Russians are creating the information space that the Republican Party is just adopting almost whole cloth?
I'm pretty much concerned about it because what Russia wants is to stop the support for Ukraine coming from our Western allies, which means that basically Ukrainian nation can die. Ukrainian nation can be defeated this way if we stop receiving support, if we stop receiving military aid, financial aid. Ukrainian nation can cease existing. Of course, it's a big concern to me, and of course, Russians use informational warfare for a simple reason: it's effective against democracies, because in the democratic society we have freedom of speech, and they introduce basically informational terrorism as something that is protected by freedom of speech. People were protesting, for example, here in Germany when Putinist newspaper Compact was banned by the government. At the same time, I don't see much, ISIS literature in broad public access, or Taliban newspapers. What's the difference between ISIS and Russian terrorism? There's absolutely no difference, because they commit same crimes and same atrocities, only Russia on a larger scale, of course. Therefore, there must be a legal solution on the first place to stop this combat tool called misinformation from being shared in the public. And of course, together with that, we should use exposing Russian propaganda as probably the best method to destroy Russian narratives, Russian misinformation, because exposing works best, of course. But these two measures must be implemented on the same level, of course.
For my audience, how can they spot and identify Russian disinformation campaigns? What are the things that reveal them?
Basically, there are some hints, like information coming from unknown sources. What Russians like to do, they like to create a myth, create a fake referring to some sources that you cannot confirm, you cannot check them. There is this amazing documentary available on YouTube called Operation Infection through K. And it explains exactly how Russian KGB implemented their informational attacks using sources that could not be checked, like sources in India or Africa, that you could not physically check those sources. And referring to them, they would spread tremendous fakes, like the US government responsible for creating AIDS.
Yeah, that's the famous Indian newspaper where the KGB back during the Cold War actually put it in there, and they just let it sit there until Western sources picked it up. And then it spread like wildfire. And that was back in the day where we didn't have the internet. Now they can put something on Facebook or Twitter. They can create a fake newspaper or a website, and there's no way of double checking it. And it just, it's the information technology has advanced so much that this stuff just spreads like wildfire. So yeah, it's making sure that it's reliable sources. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like the kind of content, because what I see is that Russians study the West, and in particular the United States, very closely. They know us as best as anybody in the world. So they know the kind of things that elicit an emotional response. You mentioned the border, for example. I am sure that there are Russian disinformation agents and bots and what have you, talking to an American audience, targeting an American audience, meant to elicit a very emotional initial response. Are they smarter than that, or is it as simple as flashing red lights and like a red flag to a bull in a bullfight? Or are they sophisticated and kind of like laying something down and hoping that it gains momentum and becomes viral? Do they go for the initial response, or do they plant seeds of disinformation? What's more common?
They plant seeds. That is their usual tactics. But of course, they also like to produce misinformation immediately. For example, after Trump shooting, all kinds of Russian and pro-Russian bots attempted to connect the shooter to Ukrainian armed forces, calling this shooter a veteran of Azov. I believe when this shooter learned about Ukraine, heard about Ukraine for the first time, he was like 17, veteran of Azov. But generally, they work for long-term perspective. And this makes their information campaign very, very dangerous and effective. And another thing is that they are using all kinds of messages that destroy society from within. So they want different social groups to fight. That's why they are producing all kinds of messages that make you hate each other. They make Democrats hate Republicans. They make Republicans hate Democrats. They make people of different races hate each other. The problem with the southern border in the United States, it is a problem. But at the same time, they do everything they can to expand this problem to the size of universe and make
it an existential threat. They send the message that this will destroy America.
Exactly. This will destroy America and many other things. Same in Europe. In Ukraine, for example, during 2014, 2015, they shared a lot of messages regarding Ukrainians attacking Russian-speaking people, or Russian-speaking people attacking Ukrainian-speaking people, which was such, it was so ridiculous because there are Russian-speaking people like anywhere in Ukraine, in Kyiv. Why would Russian-speaking people from Kyiv or Kherson or Sumy or Kharkiv attack Russian-speaking people in Donbass? That is beyond me. At the same time,
Odessa,
Odessa. At the same time, not a lot of people know that Azov guys that emerged almost a month after the Russian invasion of Ukraine began in 2014, not before it. Azov guys from Kharkiv, they are mostly Russian-speaking. Like imagining them slaughtering Russian-speaking people in like neighboring oblast, it's so ridiculous. But
simply because they both speak Russian, it makes no sense.
Absolutely.
But it elicits a very emotional response.
Absolutely. At the same time, Russian influencers like Douglas McGregor, for example, or Elon Musk, even, back in the days, Obama was also using this narrative that there are Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Ukraine, therefore they must be like Russian or Russian-leaning. Because basically it makes people like Douglas McGregor British. Am I right? Russians spread.
Well, yeah. The analogy I always make, Starsky, is that Ireland and Great Britain, just because the Irish speak English predominantly doesn't mean go to Dublin and tell an Irishman on the street because he speaks English that he's actually an Englishman, not an Irishman, and you'll have a fight. It doesn't make any sense.
You will be lucky to survive.
But it's emotional.
Of course. So what I'm saying is that Russians use all kinds of messages designed to introduce gap between different social groups and make them fight. The more the better. So it's in regard to languages, different social differences between people and things like that. National hatred, like ethnic hatred, is what Russians absolutely love to produce for many years. That's why we have to be very, very careful while even percepting, even considering Russian messages, because one thing people should always remember is that when information comes from the Russian media, and let's be clear with it, this information is most likely manipulation for the simple reason there's absolutely no freedom of speech in Russia. There are no independent media, freedom of speech is oppressed. That's why what's the point of even considering Russian media? With other media that are disguised under, for example, American independent media and news outlets, it's a more difficult question. Here we have to check information because Russians like to create websites and they involve different communication agencies for that. They like to disguise websites as like legit American media. And it was a case, I believe, about 2 months ago. So this is, again, something very important to remember, checking the sources of information. But there's a problem. People around the world, people who use news outlets, online, like social media users, we, me included, we are rather information consumers than fact checkers. And again, this is something that Russia knows perfectly. Russians know that majority of people perceive information through emotions, and 99.9% people never check facts. That's why their misinformation is so effective, because it's natural for people not to check sources. It's absolutely natural for all of us not to check whether information is fake or not.
Yeah, and I've seen them do, when they create these websites, they're very smart and able to disguise the websites. So they'll do things like create a website of the Chicago Chronicle, which has a masthead, and it looks very official, and it looks like a normal newspaper website, but there is no Chicago Chronicle. There is no San Diego Tribune, to the best of my knowledge. But this kind of thing they create, and because they create the facade, people will just accept it because it looks legitimate. It looks like a normal newspaper, but what they've done is manipulate things. How do we fight it? How do we combat this?
We need specifically trained people who will expose Russian misinformation. Unfortunately, Russia has 100 times more people specifically trained to spread misinformation, and that's a problem. That's why apparently we need governments to create some kind of institutions or establishments that will be exposing Russian misinformation. Russian misinformation is driven by the Russian state. It's supported by Russian state, funded by Russian state. At the same time, if we take a look at Europe or the United States, there's a bunch of volunteers who spend their time, and of course, in I believe 100% cases, they are not funded by any states or government, that spend time and effort in order to expose Russian misinformation. And it's very, very hard for those people to operate effectively because they have no support in most cases, psychological pressure and things like that. It's a tough job. Russian propagandists, they benefit for spreading misinformation because they are, I don't know, paid, they receive benefits from the state. State supports them, in a word. Yeah. And the volunteers fighting against the misinformation because they want transparent society, transparent information, and they want to protect freedom of speech from terrorists abusing it to destroy countries. They don't have any support in most cases. That's why I believe governments should act in order to protect the freedom of speech and in order to protect citizens from informational terrorism that can literally lead to victims.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real body count. It's not just information. It's not, the internet is filled with lies and all the rest of it. This is meant to defeat liberal democracies using the freedom of speech. So I can see a problem already with the government setting up some sort of agency or body to combat Russian disinformation, in that they will be criticized in trying to control the freedom of speech. So the Russians are using our own liberal democracy and the tenets of our liberal democracy, fundamentally the freedom of speech, against us, because we can't combat their disinformation as effectively as we'd like because we believe in allowing freedom of speech and freedom of the press. We're at what's called a catch-22. We can't fight disinformation because we want to protect freedom of speech, but the Russians use freedom of speech to attack us with disinformation.
That's what we see, and in Russia they don't have such problem.
No, because there's no freedom of speech there.
Absolutely, and that's why democracies are more vulnerable to informational terrorism, to Russian hybrid warfare. But we have to find a solution that would allow us not to fight freedom of speech, but to fight terrorists directly, to fight propagandists spreading misinformation. So again, as I mentioned, one way is to expose Russian propaganda, expose Russian misinformation, and another way is to block channels of delivering this information to the society, because society must understand that there are different opinions about media on the West, media on the East, media being biased and things. But even, biased Western media don't want their citizens to die. In case of Russia, Russian media are a combat weapon and they're designed to kill Western citizens. This is something they should understand. We see like this huge misinformation campaign in Twitter, of course, in Twitter for obvious reasons.
Elon Musk.
Promoting one very dangerous narrative. Russia is not your enemy. Russia promoted the same narrative in Ukraine before attacking. Like literally months before invading Ukraine, they were saying that Ukrainians are our brothers. We don't want to fight. The West is being absolutely hysterical. They blame Russia for nothing. We don't want to invade. Boom, they invaded like in 2 days. They are saying the same for citizens of the US. Russia is not your enemy. You should collaborate with us. We can make the world a better place, peaceful place. Both countries can be great again. Great Russia from Vladivostok to Eastern Berlin. Great America, and we can divide the world like Stalin and Hitler did in 1939.
Yeah, and all the while, they don't care about America. They don't care about the West. it's a lie for people to get lazy and complacent, and then they'll just continue to attack. Russia, especially Putin's Russia, but I would argue Russia in a larger part, sees America as their enemy, always has, and they will not stop trying to. This is not we can collaborate or we can find common ground. This is go to sleep. Go, don't worry about us. You'll be fine. And then all the while, they'll keep chipping away. They'll keep dividing. Because you made a point that is really important to remember earlier in this conversation, is their whole point is to divide and conquer.
Yeah.
That's what they do best. They split people off so that they cannot be unified and fight against their common enemy, which is Moscow. So moving forward, as we go into the final months of the American election, which is going to change the entire geopolitical situation, it will change the future of the Ukrainian war. Firstly, let me ask, how are you, as a Ukrainian, watching the American elections, how concerned are you about what's happening?
I'm always trying to be neutral about American politics, but today, for example, in Twitter, I wasted 2 hours of my life literally fighting in the commentaries, which is absolutely useless. So I am pretty much concerned about it because what we can see is people spreading pro-Russian narratives, Ukrainian haters.
Well, not least the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party, J.D. Vance, has openly regurgitated these anti-Ukrainian narratives that Russia pushes. That's the vice presidential candidate. If he gets into office, how concerned are you for the future of Ukraine?
I only hope that, they have this tendency to change opinions very fast, right? We all remember what J.D. Vance was talking about Trump, and like previously, right? And we know what he talks about Trump nowadays. So they like to shift their opinions very fast when they realize that some of their ideas might be either outdated or not beneficial to them. So I do have a hope that they will change their position eventually, but we are talking about what we see nowadays. And nowadays we can see that there is a bunch of people, Marjorie Taylor Greene, we can see that J.D. Vance, they don't support Ukraine. I've heard this opinion that, yes, they might not support Ukraine, but they don't really hate Ukraine. I don't really care if you hate or love Ukraine in case we are talking about Ukrainians defeated as a result of your politics. That makes you an enemy, right? Pope of Rome loves Ukraine probably more than J.D. Vance. At the same time, when Pope of Rome talks about peaceful resolution of conflict in Ukraine, forgetting that Russia started this conflict, violating all kinds of UN chapters and all kinds of international legislation, and killed thousands of people with their bombs. It doesn't make me like Pope of Rome more, same with J.D. Vance. He talks about Ukraine capitulating to Russia. He talks about, basically he said that he doesn't care about Ukraine at all, what happens to Ukraine. Then why should we endorse this person, right, on the first place? We're talking about messages sent by those people right now at this point of time.
Well, and notably also, as a senator, when he came to Davos, and President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Davos as well, and invited every U.S. congressional mission to come and speak with him, J.D. Vance was the only one, to my knowledge, the only one, who said, no, I'm not going to meet with him because I know everything I need to know already about the conflict in Ukraine. He's not going to give me any more new information. I think that's disingenuous. I think he didn't want to look in the president's eyes as he was throwing them under the bus. But the arrogance of now the vice presidential candidate to say, I know everything I need to know. I don't. But unfortunately, what he knows has been fed to him by the Kremlin.
This position is a position of, a true expert in international relations. I will criticize J.D. Vance for that. International relations level God. I don't care about Ukrainians. I know all I need to know. I don't need to talk to you. It's your damn job to talk to politicians. Your job is to use your mouth to produce words and use your ears to receive information. This is how politicians freaking work today. And if you don't want to do your job, then probably do something else. I don't know. Become a makeup expert or something.
Yeah, go do a podcast.
Yeah.
Well, look, Starsky, as we wrap up here, I'm very concerned about the U.S. elections because I love Ukraine and I want Ukraine to succeed. And I also think that there's ramifications well beyond just the borders of Ukraine. We are fighting the same war. The West, America, Ukraine, we're all fighting against an expansionist, aggressive Moscow, which wishes none of us any good. They just want to dominate us. So this election, to my mind, is one of the most important elections of any of our lifetimes. We have a very short period of time as we approach the actual day when the United States citizens will be casting their ballot. And that is both a power and a weakness because individuals can be manipulated and every individual has a ballot can change the course of history. And it will mean, many thousands and thousands of Ukrainians either living or dying, free or slaves to Moscow. So let me ask you this question as we move to the U.S. elections. How can American citizens recognize when they are under attack from Moscow's bots and information warriors? How do they defend themselves and be able to assess the information properly and honestly so that they can cast their ballot with the proper information, valid information?
They should look at facts. And there are facts that Russians use misinformation against Americans. There's one thing people in the United States must always remember. Republicans generally think that they're fighting against deep state, against illegal immigrants, against all kinds of threats like Chinese communists. At the same time, a lot of them sometimes, for some reason, like Russian communists. But anyways, I'm not criticizing this one. They're fighting against Zog reptilians, John Soros, and everything else. Democrats generally think that they are fighting against Republicans. But the fact is, we have to fight not against each other. We have to fight against true terrorists that design misinformation in order to destroy your state and in order to basically kill you. There is something we should always remember, and we should act together before it's too late. And unfortunately, the clock is ticking. So the main message is, don't let Russia sign your ballot instead of you.
Yeah, and I guess basically something we've already discussed, but even further, is just always check your information, especially when it's an emotional response. And there
Preferably,
are organizations out there.
Preferably you should check your information, of course, because like we don't spend our time doing that, but it's something very important because it lets you immediately understand where this information is coming from, whether you should trust it or not. There's a lot of cool stories, that bring you a lot of hype. But you should always question the truth, and you should always find facts that are easy to check. Because when people on a street tell you, I don't know, some incredible, crazy story, you often ask yourself, like, do they want to trick you? Do they want to fool you? Ask this same question every single day, every single time when you see some message or news update, because that can be exactly the case.
And if people want to check in with your organization, I know that you are fighting this battle online. How do they find you?
They can find my channel on YouTube. It's Operator Starsky. Or they can also find the channel of my institute. It's called Propaganda Study Institute, the organization that is created together with Ukrainian journalists, Ukrainian psychologists, and it's designed to fight not only Russian propaganda, but generally the propaganda and misinformation that is designed by totalitarian regimes. Our mission is to protect democracy, and that's what we're doing.
Well, I appreciate it very much, both your efforts on the battlefield at Hostomel and now you're fighting online. It's great to talk to you, Starsky. Next time you're in town, we'll go grab a meal and we'll catch up. But I appreciate you coming and speaking to my audience, and I genuinely hope that we can fight this information war, win this information war, because democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech, all of these things are at risk right now. And they're using the very same strengths against us, and that is primarily our freedom of speech. So we have to protect it. And I appreciate the efforts that you're doing, both for Ukrainians and for Americans and other people in the West. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, my friend, and be safe.
Thank you.